My wife's brother said I'd never amount to anything. Now he works for the company I own. I met my wife Emma in college. We were both studying business, though I was more focused on computer science electives while she was going the traditional corporate route. Emma's family was, well, let's just say they had opinions about everything. Her older brother Marcus was the golden child. MBA from a prestigious school, landed a six-figure job right out of college at a Fortune 500 company, drove a BMW, the whole package. The first time Emma mentioned bringing me home to meet her family, I could tell she was nervous. We'd been dating for about 8 months, and things were getting serious. She'd warned me that her family was particular about things, but I figured that just meant they cared about her. I had no idea what I was walking into. When Emma brought me home for the first time, I could tell her parents were trying to be polite, but Marcus, he made no effort to hide his disdain. I was wearing a thrift store button-down that I'd actually thought looked pretty decent, and driving a beat-up Honda Civic that made concerning noises whenever I turned left. The contrast hit me the moment I pulled into their driveway. My car looked like it belonged in a junkyard next to Marcus's gleaming BMW and their father's Mercedes. Their house was intimidating in that understated wealthy way. Nothing flashy, but everything expensive. The kind of place where even the doormat probably cost more than my monthly rent. Emma's mom answered the door with a smile that was warm but assessing. Her dad shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd spent decades in corporate boardrooms. But Marcus? He looked me up and down like I was something Emma had dragged in on her shoe. During dinner, he kept making these little comments about my unconventional career plans. I had told them I wanted to start my own tech company someday, which in hindsight probably sounded as delusional to them as it felt saying it out loud. That's cute, he said, cutting into his steak with more force than necessary. The knife scraped against the plate. Everyone thinks they're going to be the next Steve Jobs these days. The market's saturated with wannabe entrepreneurs who think they can build an app in their garage and become millionaires. Emma squeezed my hand under the table, but I could see the embarrassment in her eyes. Her family meant everything to her, and here I was, clearly not measuring up to their standards. The dining room felt massive suddenly, like I was shrinking into my secondhand clothes while Marcus expanded to fill the space with his confidence and expensive cologne. I tried to steer the conversation towards safer topics, school, Emma's internship, the weather, but Marcus kept circling back to my plans. He asked about my savings, my business model, my timeline for profitability. Each question felt like a test I was failing. Have you done market research? He asked, leaning back in his chair like he was conducting a job interview. Competitive analysis? Do you have any idea what the failure rate is for tech startups? I stammered through answers that sounded pathetic even to me. No, I hadn't hired a market research firm. Yes, I knew most startups failed. No, I didn't have a team of investors lined up. Emma's parents exchanged glances. I could practically see them wondering what their daughter saw in this dreamer with his thrift store clothes and unrealistic ambitions. The worst part came later that evening. Emma had gone to help her mom with dishes, and Marcus cornered me on the back patio. The sun was setting behind their perfectly manicured garden, and I remember thinking how everything here looked like it belonged in a magazine. Everything except me. He didn't even pretend to be friendly anymore. Look, I like Emma, so I'm going to be straight with you, he said, leaning against the railing like he owned the place. Which, in a way, he did. This was his world, his family, his territory. You seem like a nice enough guy, but you're living in a fantasy. Tech startups? Do you have any idea how many people try that and fail? 90% of startups fail within the first year. 95% never make it to 5 years. You're going to drag my sister down with your pipe dreams. I tried to defend myself, explaining my business plan, my savings account that had exactly $3,247 in it, the app prototype I'd been working on for months in my spare time. My voice sounded thin and desperate even to my own ears, like a kid trying to convince adults that his lemonade stand was going to make him rich. He just laughed, not a cruel laugh, which somehow made it worse. It was the kind of laugh you'd give a child who insisted they were going to be an astronaut. Indulgent. Pitying. Dude, you're working part-time at best by selling extended warranties to soccer moms. You drive a car that's older than some of my suits and sounds like it's about to die every time you start it. Emma deserves someone who can actually provide for her, not someone chasing Silicon Valley fairy tales that are never going to come true. He paused, looking me up and down with genuine pity, and I felt smaller with each word. You'll never amount to anything with this startup nonsense. Get a real job. Something stable. Something that pays actual money instead of promises and equity in a company that doesn't exist. Emma's smart. She's going places, and she needs someone who can keep up with her, not hold her back. I felt about 2 inches tall, standing there in their backyard, surrounded by the life Emma had grown up in. The manicured lawn, the outdoor kitchen that probably cost more than I made in a year, the pool house that was bigger than my apartment. Marcus's words hit like physical blows. Maybe he was right. I had been living paycheck to paycheck, pouring every spare dollar into my app development. Emma and I had been talking about getting engaged, but how could I propose when I couldn't even afford a decent ring? How could I ask her to build a life with someone who might never be able to give her the security she deserved, the kind of life she was used to? The drive home was torture. My Honda made those concerning noises, and each rattle felt like confirmation of everything Marcus had said. I was a joke, a part-time retail worker with delusions of grandeur, trying to date a woman who deserved so much better. That night, lying in my tiny studio apartment, I replayed every word, every dismissive glance, every polite smile from her parents that didn't quite reach their eyes. The way Marcus had said, "You'll never amount to anything," with such casual certainty, like he was stating an obvious fact about the weather. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, wondering if I should break up with Emma to save her from the disappointment I was apparently destined to become. That night changed everything. Not because I gave up on my dreams, but because I realized I had something to prove. Not to Marcus, exactly, but to myself. And maybe, if I'm being honest, a little bit to Emma's family. Maybe to everyone who'd ever looked at me like I was fooling myself. Emma and I got engaged 6 months later. I proposed with a ring I'd saved up for, working double shifts at Best Buy and eating nothing but ramen and peanut butter sandwiches for 2 months straight. The ring wasn't huge, but it was real, and it was something I'd earned through sweat and sacrifice rather than borrowed money or family help. She said yes without even looking at the ring twice, tears streaming down her face as she threw her arms around me in the parking lot of our favorite diner. For a moment, I thought maybe Marcus had been wrong about everything. Maybe love was enough. Maybe Emma really didn't care about the money or the status symbols. But I'll never forget the look on Marcus's face at our engagement party. Polite congratulations, but his eyes said this won't last. He gave a toast that night about young love and finding your way in the world, and everyone laughed and clinked glasses, but I heard the condescension underneath every word. The subtext was clear. This was a phase Emma would grow out of once reality set in. The next few years were brutal. Absolutely brutal. I kept my day job at Best Buy, got promoted to supervisor, which came with a small raise and a lot more responsibility, and spent every evening and weekend building my company. My dining room table became my office, covered with laptops, notebooks, and empty coffee cups. Our living room became my testing lab, where I'd run prototypes and debug code until my eyes burned. Emma was incredibly supportive, even when it meant our social life consisted of Netflix and homemade pizza. Even when it meant eating leftovers for dinner 3 nights a week and driving my ancient Honda to her corporate Christmas parties while her coworkers stepped out of their leased BMWs and Audis. She never complained. Not once, but I could see the strain sometimes. The way she'd glance at other couples our age buying houses while we were still renting a 1-bedroom apartment with paper-thin walls. I remember one particularly low point, about 2 years into our marriage. We were at Emma's family barbecue, an annual tradition that I'd come to dread, and Marcus had just gotten another promotion. He was holding court by the grill, talking about his new corner office and his upcoming business trip to Tokyo to close some major deal. Everyone was hanging on his every word, asking about his strategies and his insights into market trends. Then he turned to me with that smile I'd come to know so well. "Still working on that app thing?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Like he was humoring a child playing dress up. "How's that going for you?" The barbecue went quiet. Emma's parents, her aunt and uncle, her cousins, everyone turned to look at me, waiting for an answer. I could feel my face burning. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're about to launch our beta version. We've got some early users testing it now." "That's great, man. Really great." He clapped me on the shoulder a little too hard, the way you might encourage a kid who struck out at Little League. Persistence is admirable, even when it's, well, unrealistic. The conversation moved on, but the damage was done. Emma's dad asked Marcus about his investment portfolio. Apparently, he'd made some smart moves in the stock market. Her mom wanted to hear about the fancy Japanese restaurant he'd discovered on his last business trip. I stood there holding a paper plate of potato salad, watching my wife's family orbit around her successful brother like he was the sun and I was some distant, barely visible star. But something was happening that none of them could see. My app was gaining traction. Slowly at first, a few dozen downloads, then a few hundred. User feedback was positive. People were actually using what I'd built, finding value in it, recommending it to others. I hired my first employee, a brilliant developer named Chris I met at a tech meetup. We couldn't afford much. I paid him partly in equity and partly with the small amount of revenue we were generating, but he believed in the vision enough to take the risk. Late nights became later nights. Emma would fall asleep on the couch next to me while I coded, her laptop still open with her own work spreadsheets. We were both grinding, both building something, both believing in a future that only we could see. Some nights I'd look over at her sleeping form and wonder if Marcus was right. Was I being selfish? Was I asking too much of her? But Emma never wavered. When I had doubts, and I had plenty, she'd remind me why I'd started this journey. When I wanted to give up after a particularly brutal day of rejections or technical setbacks, she'd order pizza and help me brainstorm solutions. She believed in me when I barely believed in myself. The breakthrough came during year 3. A tech blog featured our app in their Hidden Gems section, calling it elegantly simple and surprisingly powerful. Downloads exploded overnight, from hundreds to thousands. Then a small business magazine picked up the story, interviewing me about entrepreneurship and the challenges of bootstrapping a startup. Then another publication, and another. Suddenly, we weren't just surviving, we were growing. I hired a second developer, then a third. We moved out of our apartment's dining room and into a small office space above a coffee shop. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and it was real. Emma was the first to notice the real change in our lives. We could afford nicer dinners without checking our bank account first. I bought her flowers just because Tuesday felt like a good day for flowers. When her birthday came around, I surprised her with a weekend trip to Napa Valley instead of our usual dinner at the local Italian place, where we'd always split an entree to save money. "Things are going well, aren't they?" she said, curled up next to me in our hotel room, looking out at the vineyard that stretched to the horizon. "Yeah," I said, still hardly believing it myself. "I think they really are." For the first time in years, Marcus's voice wasn't echoing in my head, telling me I'd never amount to anything. Maybe, just maybe, I was proving him wrong. 3 years later, and I haven't updated this story because honestly, life got crazy in the best possible way. My company went from 3 employees to 35. We landed some major contracts with mid-sized companies who needed our inventory management solutions. Turns out what started as a simple app had evolved into something much more sophisticated. Then we expanded into enterprise-level clients, the kind of Fortune 500 companies that Marcus used to brag about working with. Last month, we closed our series of funding round for $2.8 million. I still remember the day I signed those documents. Sitting in that glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown high-rise, surrounded by venture capitalists in $1,000 suits who were suddenly very interested in my little app thing. I kept thinking about Marcus's voice echoing in my head from all those years ago. "You'll never amount to anything." The lead investor, a woman named Patricia who'd built and sold 2 companies of her own, slid the paperwork across the polished mahogany table. "This is just the beginning," she said with a smile. "You've built something special here." I signed my name with a pen that probably cost more than my first laptop, trying to keep my hand from shaking. Emma squeezed my other hand under the table, and I could see tears in her eyes. We'd done it. We'd actually done it. The money changed everything, but not in the way I'd expected. Sure, we could afford things now. A house, a decent car, dinners at restaurants where the entrees weren't priced like mortgage payments. But more than that, it changed how people looked at me, how they talked to me, how they listened when I spoke. Emma and I bought our first house. Nothing too flashy, but it's ours, and it's beautiful. 3 bedrooms in a good neighborhood, hardwood floors throughout, a real office for me with built-in bookshelves and a view of the backyard, and a garden where Emma can grow the herbs she's always wanted to try. We spent weeks furniture shopping, something that had never been possible before. Emma would run her hands over dining room tables and ask, "Do you like this one?" instead of, "Can we afford this one?" We hosted Thanksgiving this year for the first time, and I'll admit there was a part of me that was nervous about how it would go. This was our house now, our table, our rules. Emma's parents had never been in a space where I was the host before. Marcus showed up in his BMW, same as always, talking about his latest promotion to regional director. But when he walked through our house, his usual confident swagger seemed diminished. I watched him take in the hardwood floors, the granite countertops, the 75-inch TV in the living room that I'd bought without checking my bank account first. His eyes lingered on details, the smart home system, the wine fridge, the artwork on the walls that Emma had picked out from a real gallery instead of Target. "Nice place," he said, and for the first time in all the years I'd known him, he sounded genuinely impressed rather than condescending. "Business must be going well." "It is," I said simply. Emma squeezed my arm and smiled, and I felt something I'd never experienced in this family before: respect. But something was different about Marcus that day. He seemed quieter than usual, less domineering. During dinner, when Emma's dad asked about his work, usually Marcus's favorite topic, he gave shorter answers than I was used to. No grand stories about closing deals or managing international supply chains. No name-dropping of executives or bragging about expense account dinners. Just things are good and keeping busy. I found myself studying him throughout the meal. The golden boy who'd once made me feel like nothing was picking at his food, checking his phone more than usual, contributing less to conversations. When Emma's mom brought out dessert and started asking me about my company's expansion plans, Marcus just listened, occasionally nodding but not offering the business wisdom he usually couldn't wait to share. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that his company had been one of our potential clients 6 months earlier. During the pitch process, I'd seen his name on their organizational chart. Marcus Henderson, Regional Director, Supply Chain Operations. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was the guy who'd told me I'd never amount to anything, and his company was considering paying 6 figures for the solution I'd built in my dining room. I kept it professional during those meetings with his company's procurement team. When his name came up in discussions about implementation timelines and departmental integration, I didn't mention that I knew him. I didn't even tell Emma about it until after we didn't get the contract. They went with a larger, more established competitor with a longer track record. Honestly, I was almost relieved. It would have felt weird working with his company, knowing he was somewhere in their hierarchy, probably completely unaware that the app thing he'd dismissed years ago was now sophisticated enough to potentially solve his company's operational challenges. The kid he'd lectured about getting a real job was now running a company that his employer had considered hiring. Emma's parents have started asking more detailed questions about my work now. Not the polite but dismissive questions from before, designed to humor me before changing the subject. Real curiosity about market trends, competition, growth strategies. Her dad even asked if I'd look at his retirement portfolio. Apparently someone at his golf club told him I understood technology investments and might have insights about which stocks to buy. Her mom asks about my employees now, wants to know if we're hiring, mentions that her friend's daughter just graduated with a business degree and is looking for opportunities in tech. She started introducing me to people as Emma's husband who built a very successful company, instead of Emma's husband who works with computers. The shift is subtle but unmistakable. I'm no longer the guy who might drag Emma down with unrealistic dreams. I'm the guy who might have good advice to offer. The guy whose opinion might be worth listening to. But Marcus? He's been different at every family gathering since. Less talkative at dinners. More distracted during conversations. I overheard him on the phone with someone during our last visit, talking in hushed tones about market challenges and restructuring initiatives and right-sizing operations. Corporate speak that I recognized from my own clients who were going through rough patches. Emma mentioned later that his company had been doing layoffs, first in manufacturing, then in middle management. The same company that had once considered hiring us was now cutting costs and eliminating positions. I tried to feel sympathetic, I really did. The economy had been tough on a lot of traditional businesses. Supply chain management was being automated, streamlined, made more efficient by companies like mine. People like Marcus, who'd built careers on managing complex manual processes, were finding their expertise less valuable in a world where software could do their jobs faster and cheaper. But there was this tiny, petty part of me that remembered that conversation on the patio 8 years ago. The part that remembered being told I'd never amount to anything while standing in his family's backyard, feeling small and inadequate and foolish for believing in myself. The part of me that wanted to ask him if he still thought I'd never amount to anything. I didn't, of course. Emma would have been mortified, and besides, I'm not that person anymore. Am I? 6 months later, the call came on a Tuesday evening. Emma found me in my home office, going through quarterly reports that showed we were ahead of projections in every category, and her face was worried in a way I hadn't seen in years. Marcus got laid off, she said, closing the door behind her. Mom just called. He's been out of work for 3 months. I looked up from my laptop, genuinely surprised. 3 months? Why didn't anyone mention it before? You know how he is. Pride. She sat down in the chair across from my desk, The same chair where I used to interview potential employees back when we were small enough that I handled hiring personally. He's been applying everywhere, but nothing's working out. The whole industry is contracting, apparently. Companies are either automating or outsourcing supply chain management. I could see where this conversation was heading. Emma had that look she got when she was about to ask me for something she wasn't sure I'd want to do. The same expression she'd worn when she asked if we could adopt the stray cat that had been hanging around our old apartment. He's got great experience, she continued, her voice careful and measured. 15 years in management, supply chain optimization, operations oversight. I know you two have had your differences over the years, but maybe your company is hiring? He's really struggling, and Mom and Dad are worried sick about him. There it was. The question I'd been dreading, and, if I'm being completely honest with myself, secretly hoping for all at the same time. My first instinct was to say absolutely not. Hell no. The guy who told me I'd never amount to anything wanted a job at the company I built from nothing? The guy who made me feel 2 inches tall at family dinners, who laughed at my dreams and told me to get a real job, now wanted to work for the loser with the pipe dreams. The irony was almost too perfect, too poetic. It felt like the universe offering me the ultimate vindication on a silver platter. But then I looked at Emma's face. She was genuinely worried about her brother, dark circles under her eyes that suggested she'd been losing sleep over this. She was asking me, her husband, the man who'd stood by her through everything, the person she'd supported through all those ramen dinner years when nobody else believed in what I was building, for help. How could I explain that her brother had basically told me I was a failure without sounding petty and vindictive? How could I tell her that every family gathering for the past 8 years had been a reminder of that moment on the patio when Marcus made me question everything I believed about myself? How could I admit that part of me was enjoying his downfall? "I'll see what we can do," I said, and the relief on her face was immediate and overwhelming. "Really? You'd consider it?" Even after. She trailed off, but I knew what she meant. Even after all the condescension. Even after all the dismissive comments. Even after years of being treated like I wasn't good enough for their family. "For you?" "Of course." She came around the desk and hugged me, and I could feel some of the tension leave her body. "Thank you. I know it's complicated, but he's still my brother, you know?" After she left, I sat there staring at my computer screen for a long time. The quarterly reports were still open, showing employee headcount, revenue growth, profit margins that would have seemed impossible during those early days when I was coding at our dining room table. What was I actually considering here? Was this an opportunity to help family, to be the bigger person and show Marcus that success hadn't changed who I was at my core? Or was it revenge dressed up as charity? Did I want to hire Marcus so I could prove a point, so I could watch him swallow his pride and ask the failure for a paycheck? The more I thought about it, the more confused I became about my own motivations. That afternoon, I talked to my HR director, Kelly. She'd been with us for 2 years now, hired when we grew large enough to need professional HR management instead of me handling everything myself. Kelly was sharp, experienced, and had a good sense for both talent and workplace dynamics. We actually did have an opening in business development, mid-level position, good salary, room for growth. The kind of job Marcus would be qualified for, though it would probably be a step down from the regional director position he'd held. He'd be managing client relationships, identifying new opportunities, working with our technical team to customize solutions. Important work, but not the corner office, executive assistant, company car kind of role he was used to. "What's the candidate's background?" Kelly asked, pulling up the job description on her screen. "Extensive supply chain management experience. MBA from Northwestern. Regional director level at his last company for the past 5 years." I paused, knowing I had to disclose the complication. "He's also my brother-in-law." Kelly raised an eyebrow. She'd been around long enough to know that family hires could get messy. Nepotism concerns. Maybe. I honestly don't know. I leaned back in my chair, trying to sort through my feelings. "It's complicated. We have history. Family stuff always is," she said diplomatically. "But if he's qualified and we need someone, does it matter how he heard about the job? Half our best hires come from employee referrals anyway." I spent the rest of the week thinking about it. During our leadership team meeting, discussing expansion into new markets and strategic partnerships, I found myself distracted, thinking about Marcus. About that conversation 8 years ago that had motivated me through countless late nights and moments of doubt. About the man who'd made me feel like my dreams were childish fantasies, who was now unemployed while I was sitting in a conference room discussing 7-figure deals and market disruption strategies. The questions kept circling in my mind. Was I being vindictive by considering hiring him? Or would I be vindictive by not hiring him? Did I want him to work for me, so I could prove that the loser with the pipe dreams had made something of himself after all? So I could watch him report to meetings in the company I built, take directions from people I hired, contribute to the success of the business he'd once dismissed? Or did I want to hire him because turning the other cheek was genuinely the right thing to do? Because Emma's family was my family now, and helping family members in need was what decent people did, regardless of past slights? Honestly, I still don't know my own motivations completely. Maybe it was both. Maybe revenge and charity weren't mutually exclusive. Maybe I could help Marcus and prove a point at the same time. But I told Kelly to reach out if he applied, to put his resume in front of our hiring committee like any other candidate. He applied the next week. His resume was impressive, even I had to admit. 15 years of progressively responsible positions, solid performance reviews from previous employers, references from former colleagues who spoke highly of his analytical skills, leadership abilities, and work ethic. Whatever else I thought about Marcus personally, he wasn't incompetent. He'd built a legitimate career, climbed corporate ladders, managed teams and budgets and complex operational challenges. He'd just been wrong about me.